see you. Of the many troubling actions the Trump administration has taken in its first 71 days, among the most damaging are his authoritarian, dictatorial, and unprecedented use of presidential power to instill fear, intimidate, exact revenge against, and punish those who dare to stand up to him and hold him accountable to the laws of our nation. A climate of fear and trepidation has descended upon the nation. The people of America are more afraid today for our democracy and for their personal safety than ever in our lifetimes. College students have disappeared off the streets paramilitary style by plainclothes, mask-wearing individuals and held incognito for days before they are discovered thousands of miles away in some private for-profit ICE detention facility. Why? For exercising their free speech First Amendment rights. Universities, bastions of free thought, have been punished for having the wrong ideology by having their federal funding revoked. And major law firms that dared to have brought cases against King Trump have been targeted with blatantly unconstitutional executive orders that, if allowed to stand, would shut those law firms down. Unfortunately, mega law firms Paul Weiss and Skadden Arps chose to settle with the king by pledging to represent pro bono only those persons and causes that the king approved of. Shame on them. Then there are other law firms that have stood up to King Trump, and they have challenged his executive orders against them in court, and they have won. Kudos to the lawyers at Perkins Coie, Covington and Burling, and Jenner and Block, among others, for standing up for themselves and for the rule of law and for our democracy. Although federal courts have consistently ruled against these numerous unconstitutional executive orders of President Trump, the mere existence of these retaliatory executive orders should be chilling to all of us. There has been no semblance of due process or fairness in any of these cases. Trump acts first, he deports first, he revokes funding first, he blacklists law firms first, and then questions anyone who challenges him later. Somehow, in spite of this, we are here today to talk about the, quote, overreach, end quote, of the federal courts, not the overreach of the executive branch official who is doing the overreaching. Our Republican colleagues want us to believe that simply because the courts are exercising their Article III power of equitable relief to temporarily halt some of Trump's most excessive executive actions, it is a sign of rot in our judicial system, that it is somehow our courts and judges, not the president, who have gone rogue and are overreaching. I disagree, but more importantly, so do the numbers. Since day one of his second term, Trump has attempted to rework our constitutional system of government through presidential fiat, issuing a record 107 executive orders in his first 71 days in office. As I mentioned, many of these executive orders are unlawful or unconstitutional, and the president does not have the power to change the Constitution through executive order, even if his name is Donald Trump. Naturally, they have been challenged in court, and of the over 150 cases filed against the Trump administration, judges have ruled against him 46 times. Of those 46, only 17 are nationwide injunctions. The cases are spread across district courts throughout the country, and judges appointed by Democrat and Republican presidents have all ruled against Donald Trump. What we are seeing playing out in courts across the country today is the judicial system working exactly as it should. America's federal courts have been handed case after case, challenging executive orders standing on questionable legal footing. And yet, the proportionally small number of nationwide injunctions shows the restraint exhibited by the judges considering those cases. I don't know what Donald Trump thought would happen when the cases made their way to the judicial branch, but clearly he has had enough with losing in court. Instead of letting the rule of law play out, Trump and his allies here in Congress now have chosen to go on the attack. Trump and his cronies have called federal judges rogue and corrupt. A judge suggested that a judge supports terrorists, and they've called judicial rulings judicial coups. MAGA Republicans in Congress have called for judges to be impeached, not because they committed a high crime or misdemeanor, but simply because they ruled against Trump. And far-right media personalities have attacked the judges' families, publicizing their personal information for millions of their riled-up followers on social media. What I had just described is nothing less than a full-scale assault on our entire judicial system, and it is putting judges, their family, and their staff lives at risk. We don't agree on much on this committee, but we should be able to agree that this is wrong, and we should be able to agree to back away from language demonizing the judicial branch, no matter what political party we belong to. Today's hearing is not just about helping Donald Trump undermine the judicial branch, though, well, let me say that this hearing is not just about helping Donald Trump undermine the judicial branch, though certainly it is about that. But Republicans on this committee are sending a message to anyone who dares to stand up to Donald Trump. If you step out of line, they will target you next. We cannot afford to allow what Donald Trump is doing through retaliatory executive orders, through targeting immigrants, through threatening lawyers, through vilifying judges, to become the normal. Our Constitution is being tested, and throughout American history, it has stood up to attempts to weaken its protections. Americans across the country are watching, and they know they didn't vote for Trump to destroy our democracy. They voted for Trump because he promised to lower the cost of living, and Trump has betrayed their trust. Prices are going up, and our economy is headed towards recession as co-President Musk threatens to take away people's Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP benefits, and veterans care.
This White House, this president continues to lose over and over again in court as people and groups from across the political spectrum challenge the barrage of unconstitutional and illegal executive actions taken by this White House in just the first few weeks of this term. Because it doesn't matter if the judges were appointed by Bush or Biden or Obama or Reagan or by Trump himself. When the president attempts illegal or unconstitutional actions, United States judges, guided by the letter of the law, must rule against him. It's a confirmation of the total subservience of today's Republican Party to this president that their response to multiple judicial rulings of executive overreach is a hearing entitled Judicial Overreach and Constitutional Limits on Federal Courts, when we should be holding a hearing on presidential power grabs and constitutional limits on executive power. This is Civics 101. The Constitution provides in Article 1 that Congress writes the laws. In Article 2, the President administers the laws. And in Article 3, the courts interpret the laws. Our Republican colleagues are concerned about the unprecedented number of successful lawsuits challenging this president's executive overreach. But it's not the actions of the courts in interpreting our Constitution and laws that are unprecedented. It's the scope and breadth of this president's executive orders that are unprecedented. It's this president's attempt to go it alone, to usurp the power of Congress and we the people, to rewrite the laws of this country and the Constitution, and to reserve unto himself, rather than the judiciary, the right to interpret the laws and our Constitution. The sheer volume of unconstitutional and illegal actions taken by this president in just the first few weeks of his term has led some to wonder if the president fundamentally misunderstands the nature and terms of his Article 2 powers. Specifically, when Article 2, Section 3 says that the president shall take care to faithfully execute the laws passed by Congress, does this president think that the word execute means that he's supposed to kill laws rather than carry them out? Unfortunately, the underlying rationale for much of this action is a radical theory set forth in Project 2025 and elsewhere. It's one that would vest federal power in a unitary executive, sidelining two of the three co-equal branches of our government, Congress and the Judiciary. We're here because Republicans who control the House and Senate have, thus far, chosen to abandon their constitutional duty to constrain an out-of-control executive branch. If they don't see anything wrong with it, their constituents do, and more of our colleagues would know that if they actually showed up at town halls in their districts. Our Constitution is built upon the rule of law, that no one is above the law, and our legal system is built on the idea of judicial independence. In the past 2 months, we've seen our judicial system working as the founders intended, and as the Supreme Court ruled in Madison versus Marbury over 200 years ago, it's the job of our judiciary to declare laws and executive actions unconstitutional if they're in conflict with the Constitution. The federal judges who've ruled against President Trump's unlawful power grabs are simply interpreting the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress to protect the rights of the American people. To suggest otherwise is to substitute a theory of executive primacy that is completely at odds with our constitutional history and separation of powers. Mr. Chairman, I wish that we could dismiss today's hearing as just political theory or theater, but the stakes are too high for the American people and their rights hang in the balance. While this administration has begun by attacking people it vilifies, including immigrants, students, or working people, no one should kid themselves. It's clear the rights of every American are at stake. When the White House and some of our colleagues claim the right to deny due process to immigrants who they claim have broken a law, that's a sham. Because if you don't support the rights of immigrants to due process, then you don't support anyone's right to due process. Because without due process, the government can do whatever it wants to anyone, including citizens, and they aren't able to defend themselves. What's to stop ICE from saying that Mr. Roy or Mr. Jordan is a member of a violent gang and shipping them out of the country? Attacks on our courts, whether in the form of executive orders punishing law firms and lawyers that dare to stand up for the rule of law, or hearings like this attempting to constrain the courts, or tweets urging impeachment or violence against judges, are part of a broader attack on the rule of law. Our Republican colleagues have shown that they're not concerned about civil rights and the rule of law. Their sole concern appears to be whether or not a federal judge has ruled against this administration. They've gone so far as to call for impeaching judges who rule against this White House, eliminating courts altogether, or advocating to cut off funding for the court system. The fact is, if the president wants to end his legal woes, he can simply follow the Constitution and our laws. Because if a president issues illegal executive orders, the courts are duty-bound to block them. But rather than accepting that reality, our Republican colleagues would rather hand the president the keys to unchecked authoritarian power. Let's be real. Americans elect a president every 4 years, not a king. Even if President Trump had won a landslide electoral victory, which he didn't, that would be beside the point. An electoral victory does not justify running roughshod over the courts and the Constitution, which every president is sworn to uphold. Presidential power is not absolute. When President Trump empowers Elon Musk to ignore laws Congress passed or slash funding Congress appropriated, he's undermining the power of the American people who voted us into office. If President Trump's agenda is as popular as he claims, he can work with his allies in Congress to convince the American people to support it. But he has no right to simply do whatever he wants just because House and Senate Republicans don't have the backbone to stop him. Democrats and independents are standing up against President Trump's blatant power grabs because if he can deny the rights of some people, there's nothing stopping him from denying the rights of all people all across America. And that should concern everyone in this room and everyone across this nation. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. We now recognize the chairman of the full committee for his opening statement, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Who decides? That's the fundamental question. Who gets to make the call? Is it the guy whose name was on the ballot, or is it some bureaucrat? Is it the guy who got 77 million votes, or some district judge? The left always says, trust the bureaucrat, trust the judge. It's the Faucis, it's the Boasbergs who get to make the call. After all, they're the experts. They're smarter than we, the people. They're smarter than all us hillbillies in flyover country who voted for President Trump. Trust them. That's not how it works. We, the people, have the power. You know what's interesting? For all the left's talk about democracy, they don't really trust it. Last summer, they kicked their nominee off the ballot without a vote, without an election, and they put someone else on the ballot without a vote, without an election. So of course they like some judge issuing orders or injunctions that stop the head of the executive branch from doing what he said he was going to do when he ran for the job and when the American people elected him. Think about it. Here in D.C., an elected judge thinks she's better equipped to determine military readiness than the commander-in-chief. An unelected judge in California thinks he gets to decide how many probationary employees work in the executive branch, not the guy who was elected to run the executive branch. Another unelected federal district judge here in D.C. thinks he gets to decide how long illegal gang member terrorists stay in our country, not the president, not the commander-in-chief. And now that same judge gets randomly assigned the Hexeth case, and he'll get to determine who the Secretary of Defense can talk to and how he has to do it, not the president. I think Americans see through this all. They know Representative Iss's legislation is exactly what's needed. They know who they elected, and they want him to make decisions that affect the executive branch, that affect our country. So I want to thank our chairman, Mr. Issa and Mr. Roy, for this hearing. I want to thank Mr. Issa for his bill. Mr. Schmidt, a member of our committee, who we put his amendment on that bill, which I think makes it even stronger. We passed that legislation 4 weeks ago. It's going to be on the floor tomorrow. It's going to pass the House. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. Ms. Romero, what you've went through, thank you for coming. And of course, Speaker Gingrich, for your half a century of service to the Constitution and the country, thank you for joining us. That is the question, though. Who decides? The individuals that we, the people, elect, or someone else? I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for joining us today. So why have 34 federal judges from 11 different districts with a combined 474 years of service on the bench, judges appointed by Presidents Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump, entered 57 different preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders against President Trump and Elon Musk's executive orders and actions, like the ones nullifying constitutional birthright citizenship, unilaterally dismantling congressionally created agencies, or impounding and diverting funds appropriated by Congress. Well, the majority says it's because these are radical judges. And they lead off, as our good Chairman Issa did, with Judge Jeb Boasberg, the chief judge of the District Court of the District of Columbia, who enjoined the mass roundup and deportation of immigrants to an infamous El Salvadoran prison in peacetime without any due process at all, allegedly under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a statute explicitly limited to wartime and military invasion. Some of our colleagues have been railing against Judge Boasberg for ordering the planes to be turned around. They say those planes were filled with terrorists, I think my good friend from Texas said. Well, here's one person of many who wasn't a terrorist on that flight or a gangbanger. His name's Kilmer Garcia. He's a Marylander married to a U.S. citizen who has a 5-year-old son with autism. And he went to pick up his son, but he was picked up first by ICE. And then he was shackled and put on that airplane and shipped off to the torturers of El Salvador without ever having the benefit of those two most beautiful words in the English language, due process. He never saw a judge. Nobody ever told him what he was being charged for. Nobody ever told him that there were any charges against him. And he was sent to a mega prison run by the self-proclaimed dictator of El Salvador. And yesterday, you know what happened, Mr. Chairman? The Trump administration admitted that it had made a mistake. He was not actually a gangbanger. He was not a criminal. It was all a mistake. If there'd been due process, maybe that would have been determined, but there wasn't. But they put him on that plane in El Salvador. Well, all's well that ends well, right? No. The administration says there's nothing they can do about it now because he's no longer in U.S. custody. This guy who lives in my state, married to a U.S. citizen, with citizen children, he's stuck with the dictator of El Salvador. Well, Judge Boasberg, some of our colleagues want to impeach him. Look, some of our colleagues, they've got for wanted signs in the Cannon House office building with the names and faces of judges on them. They want to impeach them now. They want to impeach Judge Boasberg. Some of my colleagues should be alerted to this fact. Judge Boasberg was first named to the bench by President Bush. He was Justice Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale. Known in legal quarters as a very conservative judge, but they want to impeach him because he stood up for the rule of law. Now, Democrats say all of these executive orders and actions are being struck down not because these are radical left rogue judges, but because the judges, regardless of who appointed them, are doing their jobs. If the number of decisions striking down Trump illegality is unprecedented today, it's only because the sheer number of illegal acts committed in the first 100 days is unprecedented. America's never seen anything like it before in our entire history. Trump and Musk have been systematically violating the Constitution and breaking the law to trample the rights of the people and steal our data, fire excellent federal workers en masse, and dismantle congressionally created government agencies and programs, from the VA and Medicaid to NOAA, NIH, and Social Security, which Elon Musk called, quote, the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. When brave Americans go to court to defend themselves against the President of the United States and the richest man in the world, these judges from across the political spectrum are showing up to work, and they're showing America why we have an independent judiciary. And yes, I've got to tell my friend Chairman Jordan that even if you campaign on doing something unconstitutional, like naming people kings and queens, or stealing other people's money, no, that doesn't make it constitutional, even if you campaigned on it. And the vast majority of the things here, I never heard of them campaigning on. But in any event, it's irrelevant to the job of the courts. Anyone who's read any of the decision knows that what we're witnessing today is a matchless constitutional crime spree by a rogue president and his Doge enforcer, a government contractor who has pocketed $38 billion from the taxpayers, multiples more than he has ever even claimed to have saved us. And we know how Doge makes typos, converting millions into billions. Read the decisions. Look at these cases, finding that Trump violated Congress's spending power and usurped our lawmaking power under Article 1. Read the cases, finding that Trump violated the First Amendment free speech rights, the Fifth Amendment due process rights, the Sixth Amendment counsel rights of the people, even by discriminating by name against law firms and lawyers, actually banning specific firms and lawyers from federal buildings and courthouses, federal contracts and federal employment, all simply because they dared to represent their clients, and Trump hates them. Now, out of this mountain of cases, which I can only surmise our colleagues have not read, let's zero in on Trump's executive order contradicting the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which says that any person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen of the United States. Trump got struck down by a Reagan judge, a Biden judge, an Obama judge, and a Bush judge. The Reagan judge said, quote, "I've been on the bench for 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented is as clear as this one. This is a blatantly unconstitutional order." Blatantly. This is from a Reagan judge. Now, my colleagues seem to think that an executive order is greater than a law or the Constitution itself. But an executive order cannot trump a federal statute, much less the Constitution. An executive order is just an order to the executive bureaucracy to follow a policy unless and until it's countermanded by law, by the courts. Many of our colleagues are following Trump and Musk in calling for impeachment right now. There have been only 15 federal judges impeached in all of American history, always for serious professional misconduct, like taking bribes, stealing from the court, or habitual drunkenness, not even occasional drunkenness, habitual drunkenness on the bench. Congress has never defined a doctrinal or interpretive disagreement as a high crime and misdemeanor, much less when the judge's reasoning was airtight correct. The spreading movement to impeach and attack judges is so alarming that Chief Justice Roberts issued a rare statement last week. He said, for more than 2 centuries, it's been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The proper response, of course, is to appeal the decision. And to be fair, Chairman Issa expressed his strong disapproval of these wanted posters yesterday in the Rules Committee. Now, for some members, talk of impeaching these so-called rogue judges is just fun and games. But the vicious assault, the vicious rhetorical assault on the judiciary has turned into something more sinister in certain quarters. Actual violent threats, bomb threats, direct intimidation. Judge Boasberg, the Bush appointee, must endure scandalous online attacks and insults by President Trump and Elon Musk and their followers. Even worse, the campaign of vilification has spread to Judge Boasberg's family, including outrageous attacks on his daughter, who's had her photo and her place of work posted on social media by Elon Musk to his 290 million followers. These threats follow an actual bomb threat made to the sister of Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And there are numerous other threats taking place today. And of course, we've seen threats and actual violence and murders take place in the past. I call on my colleagues right now to call off the campaign to impeach federal judges for doing their jobs. I call on them to demand that the Trump administration comply with all judicial orders while appealing whichever ones they want to appeal, and to demand the return of people unlawfully taken to El Salvador on that so-called plane full of gangbangers. And I especially call on them today to denounce all violent threats, doxing, online vilification, and threats against our judges. This is the Judiciary Committee of the United States House of Representatives, and we should